All right, here we are, merging time and space together. Me, here in my attic in Easton, Pennsylvania. You, wherever you are as you hear the sound of my voice. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome and thanks. Your attention here is greatly appreciated. How are you? How is your sense of self today? If it's not so good, that's okay. You're not the only one. And I suppose that's why so many of us around here are passionate about yoga. Because that's the name of the game with yoga, right? One's sense of self. Although, I've been really thinking about that and how, as important as it is for me to be able to develop the skills to go within and observe and perceive and discern what my course in this life ought to be, I'm also starting to really feel like maybe there's more to it than that, right? That's still just my individual journey, and I can't help but feel there's something much bigger to it than just that. And that is really what I think my yoga practice is a lot about. And it does require, I think, especially now, given everything that's come to pass over the years in the yoga world, and those of you who've listened to this show for a long time, you know, I've been tracking it as best I know how. It seems like the time's come for us to have the courage to let go of some long-held, entrenched ways of thinking about things and doing things, and to really embody the truth in each person having their own ability to discern truth from within. Seems to me it more important than ever that we would develop facility in this regard. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has been pondering this kind of thing in terms of how we're going to teach and practice going forward and what's important to be communicating in that. In any case, perhaps I'm just waxing a little bit too much here, although it's very appropriate given that my guests today are Angela Farmer and Victor Van Kooten. And as I kind of mentioned to Angela and Victor at the very beginning, I've been trying to get them on this show for years. Literally, I've sent invitations to whatever email addresses I could find for them over the years, wanting to talk to them. But it never happened until now. And it's funny, I just randomly came upon something from them and saw this other email address that I hadn't tried. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I could try one more time. And sure enough, this time the stars aligned. And you know, there seemed to me to be deep purpose behind that. And I don't know if Angela and Victor felt it, but to me, it was really the exact conversation I needed to have at the exact moment that it happened. And Victor and Angela, they're so ahead of their times, and everything I was saying about needing to be able to discover and discern truth from within and to find guidance from internal and from the sources of nature and not like external power structures, it couldn't be more exemplified in their work. And I just find their approach to practice is very, I think, pertinent to the moment as well. So I was overjoyed that this happened, and I'm really excited to be bringing it to you today. Real quick before we get to it, I do want to send some special thanks to our podcast premium subscribers. Today, in particular, I would like to shout out Eleanor Crowley and Jamie Barlow. Thanks, Eleanor and Jamie. Appreciate you. If you're someone who's newer to this show, we have a public feed. The last 52 episodes is always free. But then we also offer a podcast premium subscription that holds the rest of our archives. And it's also really just a way for people to support the show. It's choose your rate. You can cancel at any time. And if you don't have any money right now and you wanted to get to those old episodes, all you have to do is email us and we will give you a free account, no questions asked. But if you're in a position to give even just a little something, it makes a huge difference for this show. We're very grateful to everybody who does that. If you want to learn about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, along with all my stuff, I've got ongoing live classes and regular weekly meetings, as well as on-demand videos and all the stuff that I'm doing. Everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. So, like last week, I don't know if you listened to last week with Doug Keller. That was pretty epic. Well, we got another epic conversation to listen to together today. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's do it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Angela Farmer and Victor Van Kooten.
Hello.
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 Hello, Victor and Angela. It's such a pleasure to get this moment to meet you, even though I wish it was in person. Next best thing. I have to say, I've sent you a number of invitations to come on this show over the years, maybe 2 or 3 over the last 5 or 6 years.
Oh, really?
Yes, but I have to say it's so interesting because the one I sent a few weeks ago that has actually led to this moment, when I was reflecting, getting ready to speak with you, it came from such a different place within me. Like, my motivations for inviting you in the past were different because there's been some very big shifts in my own personal practice and understanding recently. And so the fact that this invitation and where I am now has led to this moment where I'm actually speaking with you, it feels very auspicious and it feels like a gift. So thank you so much for giving of your time today. I really appreciate it.
No, you're so welcome.
Yeah.
And you know, I have to say also to you that I do a weekly teachers call that I've been doing for, I think, about 4 years, since long before the pandemic. And there was some shifts happening in the yoga world leading up to the pandemic. And a lot of those shifts had to do with teachers feeling like they needed to let go or break free of the confines of some of the yoga lineage traditions and the dogmas in there. And many of the teachers were feeling like they weren't even sure if they should call themselves yoga teachers anymore. And they were exploring somatic movement modalities. And they were calling themselves movement teachers instead of yoga teachers.
Yeah.
And a lot of that also, I think, for me personally, it wasn't so much that, but I remember at a certain point, I moved away from certain more contemplative aspects of practice. Like I wasn't chanting as much and I was talking about functional movement. And it was a lot more, I think, because I was a bit in reaction to the market forces.
Yeah.
And so many
Well,
of us...
it's also...
go ahead.
The institutionalization is what bothered us all the time in the beginning. And also, we are interested in being human and not so much into being, in my case, Dutch, or Angela's case, English. We are basically not so much into the names that yoga has offered from the East. We've been practicing in the East, and we've been practicing a lot with Iyengar, but he comes from a very different tradition. And so you have to understand that his physical yoga was so much more based on being a Brahmin, always surrounded with these ceremonies and fire ceremonies, and it was part of his life. So he could concentrate on this one kind of part of the Astanga, this one anga that is basically the asana practice, was very important for him. And it was important for us because you're sitting there, you get born, you have a body, the body develops, and you have your surrounding that is coming from your parents, and then from the teachers around you from schools, and the contact with all the other children. So you learn the language of the people that you grow up with, but to suddenly jump into a whole different tradition, an Indian tradition, was a little bit kind of bothering, because you have to try to understand things that just come from an external point of view and not from how you grew up. So it's kind of a crampy business to suddenly call all these Sanskrit names and all that.
Well,
so
I know.
We try to get back.
Well, I was going to say, I came into yoga like in the early 90s in New York, and I kind of rode the wave of it into the mainstream. And another thing that happened is that those teachers, a lot of them got put up on some pretty high pedestals, and then those pedestals came crumbling down, and people saw that while they may had offered some gifts, they certainly had a fair amount of failings. And I think when I was saying to you that the teachers were shifting just before the pandemic, what we were talking about in my teachers group was moving away from like dictates of telling people what to do with their body, and using more invitational language, like asking questions so that students can explore and discover for themselves rather than something being dictated from on high. And then I will say this, and this is the introduction to why I think I'm speaking to you now, is that over the pandemic myself, I personally needed more poetry and more nature imagery, and like embodying trees and animals and all this stuff that I've not ever really done in my practice before, because I've always been kind of cynical, honestly. I think years ago I would have thought this was bullshit. But now I'm like, it's everything. And I'm saying all this because I know what I know of your work. You have been singing this song for decades, and it feels like you were really ahead of your time, is what I want to say.
How do we know that yoga is not exactly this? Yoga is supposedly about uniting. And so if you have to fit in with somebody else's system, what are you uniting with? Just one person's system. But if you are reconnecting back into your deeper self, you find that you actually are connected into nature, because that's where we come from, and that's what we are part of. And to force yourself into weird positions, I think it's not bad in anything to try these things out. And it gives you a start. And I really appreciated Iyengar in the beginning. And by the way, I wish I could see you. It's
if you want, I'll turn on the camera. If you want to see me, I'm happy to say hi. If you want to see the camera,
that's lovely. Yes.
You want to see me? That's fine. Again, honestly, I do a lot of these Zoom meetings So I think for me, seeing an image of myself, like I've trained myself, like not to look at it and to look at the other person, but it's energy. It takes energy to not like have to look at myself.
Because we haven't been able to do any groups here, which is what the best part of it is when you're, as you know, when you're really with people. And I've been teaching online, and it's not possible in the situation we have to see all the people on a screen. It's too confusing. And so I have to teach into a little black hole of a camera. And it's really, really hard. So it's, for me, it's a great relief to see a real person.
Well, maybe you could turn your camera on too. If mine's on, maybe you could put yours on too.
I don't know why ours isn't. Do you, Victor?
I have no idea where to go. Let's click on this
There's
thing.
a little button that you have to push. There's a little camera button, I think, maybe that you have to hit. It's okay if you can't find it. There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
All right.
All right, good. All right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Much better. Hi.
All right.
Well, in the beginning, the yoga was such an excitement for people because there was something missing in just the traditions of the West. And as people were starting to look towards the East, and then to find an Eastern teacher was sort of exciting. And there was a lot, even in the yoga as it came to us, that helped us out of being stuck in Western religion and the formalities of religion, let's say, and in the culture. And I think it played its part, but it was time, like you have to leave your parents, it's time to break out. And I think both Victor and I felt the need to have more movement and to feel more comfortable. And I noticed that that kind of yoga that we learned with Iyengar worked very well for rather more stocky, shorter, sort of, you could say, very well proportioned bodies, as Iyengar was. But if you were rather tall and lanky, it was really difficult because of the speed you had to do these things in, and the body just didn't work that way. And so personally for me, it was a journey to start really working with myself, because I had many issues that needed to be looked at, and I could not look at them in that kind of stylized way. I had to look at them by feeling and by moving and discovering what in my body worked, and then what, because of the various things that happened to me in my life, they didn't work, rather than closing up around those places that didn't work or didn't work so well in order to achieve this goal of a perfect asana. And that was what was presented in that style. And so it was.
Let me ask you a quick question, if I might. I heard, and I want to mention this to listeners, I listened to the episodes you recorded with Blake Tedder, and they're fantastic, and I'll even link to them. I'm happy to have everybody listen to them. They're very informative. And in those, you mentioned very briefly that you had some experience with yoga before Iyengar. And I'm curious about that. What was the yoga that you had tasted before you ended up practicing with Iyengar?
No, not me. I had always been curious. I mean, it was many, many years ago. Goodness, let me see. It was
65 years ago.
80. Yes, it was something like that, 65 years ago. So yoga was not around in UK, but I came across a book by Aldous Huxley in which he talked a little bit about it, and it fired me immediately. But there was this one sentence that said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so I had to say, okay. And it was quite a number of years later, maybe 10, 11 years later, that I came across this possibility of yoga. Iyengar had been coming to London to work with the Yehuda Menuhin, and he did that once a year. And his Yehuda Menuhin's secretary decided, well, why not give Iyengar a little extra cash and he can do a class outside Yehuda Menuhin's private and give the chance also for other people to experience it. And so my first teacher of yoga was one of these ladies who had done only a little bit with Iyengar in one of these little classes. And Iyengar only came to London for 3 weeks, I think. But I watched the asanas. I went out to the edge of London with a friend who told me about her. I was so excited and just watched the class, and something very familiar came into me. I thought, I know this. And so I joined her class and found that actually I could hardly do anything. But so it became a challenge. And I think that challenge was good because it set me off on a whole track. And then I started looking much more into it. But I think, Victor, you did some yoga before.
Well, that was only when I was 12, but I had in the book, the cupboard with books that my father had, was a little booklet that was called Sports in Yoga by Yasudian, with text by Elisabeth Heitsch from Switzerland. And he was Indian, and he had a little white thing around his groin and a little white thing around his head, turban.
I've actually seen that book. I know what book you're talking about. I've seen it before.
Sports in Yoga, yes. And so when it was summer and, it was hot and we didn't have to go to school, I was 12 years, and I was practicing all these poses out of the book in the garden, nice sunny type, and I really liked it. I did it a few times, and then I forgot about it ever since. And when I was 26, I started to suffer from back pain by being a painter and working until late night. I had a very long spine, and spaces between the spine's bones, they were a little more uncomfortable, large, compared to, to do all the asanas with. So I would work myself into the couch for 3 days at a time, doing forward bends and things like that. So then I asked my father that I really would like to do yoga. And he said, no, you should just read books about yoga. Don't do it. But a week later, he had cut out a little paper tidbit from a newspaper clip advertising Donna Holloman, who just came back from India, and she started the yoga teacher training, Iyengar style, in Breda, my hometown, where her mother lives. And, and so my then wife and me joined her. She was called Titia at that time, Titia Holloman. And then we were there for 1.5 months. But I told her, I'm a painter. I don't want to become a yoga teacher, but I'm interested in going as deeply into it as possible. And so that was how I started. And then she left again for India, and she said, now I have a whole group of students in the next village or town, but they would like to continue. Would you be willing to teach them? And I said, okay, I'll try. So I had to buy a very cheap car for 500 guilders and drove illegally over there and things like that. And, then I got the job done, and I started to think like, okay, now she's gone to India back. Let us start a kind of inspirational group that we all like yoga for a certain reason, and we come in from different angles, from different backgrounds. Let's teach each other all the time. So So I called it the yoga work group, Nederland. But anyway, it grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and it turned out that people said, "You do the teaching," you know. So I became unwillingly an authority, which I never liked. And you talked about these kind of
hierarchies that form, or pedestals that get put up on.
Immediately form, and the pedestal. But both Angela and me, separately, later when we met in London, we decided to keep it on a low burning form and keep that inspirational part up and not the institutionalized part. So we never gave in to the certificate business, and we tried to stop Iyengar from giving certificates.
Now, wait, let me ask you, did you two meet studying with Iyengar at the same, when did you two meet?
Yeah.
In London,
yeah. Victor was coming, well, the first 2 or 3 years, I think. It was a very small group, and it was quite exciting to be with this master, because he was a master. I mean, he had an incredible auric field. I first met him going to the first class, walking along a street in the quiet suburbs of London, North London. And as I was coming towards this school hall where the class was going to be held, I just happened to notice this little Indian man going to a post box. We had red pillar boxes in those days when you mailed your letters. And I just passed this little Indian man mailing a letter. And then when I'm in the class, and I think there were probably about 14 people, maybe 15, 16, and we were in 2 lines, and I was right at the back of one of those lines. And the door opened, and in came this atmosphere, yes. And he was huge. He had this ability of energy, to projective energy, and he appeared huge. And he was at the front of the class, and he got us all doing these things. And I thought I was well hidden, but no, he seemed to be able to see right through everybody, and every now and again give me a direct correction or piercing experience. So I was hooked. And what I think it did for me was give me now I have something, because I could use my body, because I was always quite spiritually orientated, but I couldn't fit in with the conventional religions that I was raised with. And when I could use my body, it became my spiritual experience. My practice was that, because I would meet something that felt real, even if it was the resistance of the body. And so that was probably what kept me in that tribe or fold of Iyengar for a long time, until I began to feel it wasn't working for me. I was just injuring myself all the time, and I didn't feel more enlightened, and I didn't feel really comfortable with other yoga practitioners.
Let me ask you about that, because I've spoken to some other folks who studied with Iyengar at this earlier time that you're describing as well. And many of them have said that their initial time with him or initial practice with him was very different than as things got bigger and became more of a circus as time went on. Like someone said, I remember doing a jump back sun salutation with Mr. Iyengar, but like later on, that would have been unheard of among Iyengar people or something, that over time it changed. Did you observe that happen?
Yes, I think he felt he had to change, because, the more people you have, the more responsible you are, and the more different level standards, injuries, and that. And so maybe he felt that he had to kind of formulate it more and keep it more
standardize it or something.
And standardize, exactly. Because he was in the beginning, he was inspiring in the beginning, and he would have flashes and he'd go for them. And he would do extraordinary things in the class. He was like a tiger let out of a cage. And I loved that. and he would go around and he'd hit people and this, that, that.
See, but people talk about that now as abuse, and you're saying that you love it. And is there a disconnect to that?
Most of the time, it was very corrective. It was body language. So
I've heard you talk about that, like making people aware of where they weren't paying attention or something. But
his hand, because he was so clear in what he was doing then, and he was also exploring himself, I think, and evolving further his practice and his teaching. But I remember wondering how you would correct a trikonasana, and seeing everybody in trikonasana, and he would go to one person and give them this amazing hit on the side. And those hits, sometimes they had a sting to them, but you always felt your body moving into an energy alignment. So he was much more working with energy, and he was inspired himself. I think later he was more into this feeling, I'm a guru and I have to control everybody.
Yeah, he could get later, he could get angry. Also in the beginning, he could get really irritated with the arrogant English people, because, you know, India had suffered enough from that. So he was always, you know, not really welcomed as an Indian traveler. He had to be always the last in line and things like that. So he had this kind of a thing that he felt justified, put in a place where he didn't want to be, because he had this tremendous self-confidence. And it's actually through this self-confidence that his self would shine and glow. This is the terrible thing. I mean, he could blow himself up by just feeling so confident. And it was that everybody surrendered immediately to it, into it. But he was insecure as a child, and it stayed underneath the surface all the time. So I had a very strange connection with Iyengar that was actually much more like a family member, I could say. It didn't have that guru sisha business, you know. We didn't have that. And he would say things like, no, not you. Like, you know, it's for other people. So there was
he could tell you weren't buying it or something. Or did you think of him as a guru, Angela? Did you think of him as your guru?
No. And actually, I didn't. I thought, I saw him as somebody that I respected because he knew so much about the body. And I thought I got tremendous help and healing from him at that time. And I felt also a connection. But, when I was my first time in India, I would meet people in Pune, local people. And we'd talk, and then they would find out I was going to Iyengar, and they would say, "Oh, you know, he's not a guru. He's just a businessman. Come and meet my guru." And their guru, everywhere in India, it seemed, and so in a city, it would be in every little section of the city. People would have their guru, who was kind of like, I suppose, the parish priest, you know. And he would walk around, and so I met one or two of those, and they were lovely people who had spiritual background and spiritual experience, and they would come into their group and give some kind of blessing or chanting or whatever they did. So I realized, you know, that this was only one aspect of yoga, but it was something that I felt I needed. I needed to work with the body. I had enough inner light and experience of the spiritual, just in me anyway. I had tremendous experiences personally, but I needed to get it into my body and to work with the body so I would have a better, what shall we say, instrument, I suppose. And so that's why I stayed and respected what he did. But it did change. And interesting that other people found that too. It really did change as things got bigger. And
yeah, you said that at a certain point, one, it was no longer working the way it once did. And then also it seems like you just mentioned that there was a moment where like certification became a thing. And you said, Victor, that you tried to talk him out of it. I find that very intriguing.
No, there was a whole group of us, basically. It was not me. It was also Angela, and it was Mary Stewart, and a whole group of English teachers. And the funny thing is that Silva Mehta, who was actually the one that organized everything there, she's a Hungarian woman originally, but Iyengar liked her very much, but she was a little bit of a negative force and tried, this happens very easily. People who can't do that much physically, they throw themselves into, I am the representative of Iyengar, and became more powerful on that level, which was actually very bothersome. But anyway, she wanted to have the certification because of the special school for adult teaching in London needed to have certified yoga teachers. And so Iyengar was asked to get the certification out. And we said, oh, please don't,
It brings in so much competition, and it takes it into the usual road of everything. Who's the best? Who earns the most money? And so on. It's inevitable. And also it's inevitable the way things go. They start in a very pure and, pure integrated way. But then it's like a plant. It's very small and it has to get its roots and it starts to grow and open up. But then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then starts the decay because it has to fall back again in order for something new to grow. And I see it like that. And I think he did. He planted seeds. He brought something to the West, which was truly valuable, and set a lot of people off on their own path. Mm-hmm. But it came to a point where it overdid itself. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's what our society has done now, and we have to let go.
Yeah.
And the letting go, hard though it is a part of the process, so that it becomes manure or compost.
Well, I want to. I heard you talk about another very specific moment, and it's interesting to me because it's something I've been talking about recently, which is also something in the past I think I would have scoffed at, but I definitely in my life have received messages at certain times. And more recently, I've been examining what are those messages and where are they coming from? But you spoke about a moment at the Feathered Pipe Ranch, which I have been at a couple of times. I've had the great fortune of being on that place, that land, and it is a very powerful place. I had very profound experiences there, meeting India and being there. And you spoke about a moment where you decided to start changing what you were teaching.
Well, I had already changed, but I started to feel like a polar bear with a foot on one piece of ice and another 2 feet on another piece of ice, and the two pieces were getting further and further away, because what I learned from Iyengar and had originally tried to my best possible ability, not perfectly, of course, but I tried so hard to reproduce what he had taught. And I had a photograph of him always where I taught in wherever I was, in whichever classroom. And I tried to teach what he taught, because he gave some amazing insights. And although I know I was not really doing what he did, there was that there. And then the problem was, that was what was expected. So if you were invited to teach, which was a big honor to go and teach in a hall somewhere with a lot of people, I felt I have to present what they are asking me for. But in my own practice, I'd already left him in my feeling, and I was following a whole other process of listening and feeling and intuitively moving and going into the places that needed more help rather than going into a pose and suppressing them. So these two things were getting further apart, and I felt suddenly in this class, I can't do this anymore, because I love the class, I love the students, but I can't tell them what I'm really doing. So I don't like to be in that position. And that was when I went outside and got that message and went back in again and started to share what I did in my own practice, expecting there to be a sort of riot.
You're allowed to bend your knees? What? I'm allowed to bend my knees? What?
This is how it was, really. And the teachers were like that. Bang, bang, bang. And people got quite hard and tough, trying to be like he could be hard and tough because it was his thing and he was the energy behind it. But when you try to copy somebody's, you can't put on the mask of somebody else.
Because you have to be denying something in you to do that. You have to be taking on something else rather than something from within, it seems.
Exactly. But what was interesting was that the people recognized and came up and said, oh, that's how I practice secretly in my room, or that's how yoga used to be like for me. So I think it was just part of a whole wave, like you say, that things were moving, wanting to climb out of this kind of cage of formal structures.
And I guess it's interesting to me also that the direction that you moved in was like away from structure, or like I think Victor said it once, something like, formlessness is the basis of all power. I wrote that down. I was like, oh my God. And then the idea that the practice, it isn't as like structured, or even honestly, even people who are using structure are finding ways to let people explore within it more. And I'm wondering, what does that come from? Like, where is that shift to? Is it just about observing how you feel more and letting that dictate it? Or where does if it's not structure and form, where does it come from? I think that's why it trips a lot of people out. If you just say, okay, just explore, like Eric Schiffman did freedom yoga and just put music on and said, do whatever you want. And people were like, what do I do? I'm paying you to just let me do whatever I want. So I'm kind of curious, where do you think when you made that shift, where was it coming from in you?
I think it's basically the recognition that, the search for the more internal world that everybody talks about, like, how to go inside and how to guide people inside. Krishnamurti was talking about that it's your own decision all the time. Your teacher lives inside. Your teacher will tell you what to pick up and what to leave out. These things are very personal because the yoga path has to be very personal if it wants to be inspired, and that it needs to be inspired to really do it.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.